How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's been a while. I'm pretty sure it's been 91 days since we last posted a video, which is ridiculous. But we've kind of had some technical difficulties over the winter. We finally got them figured out now. Been super busy, both of us. We got 2 feet of snow outside. We've had some big winter storms. So here we are in early February, just waiting for fishing season to get here. So yeah, we're gonna, as long as nothing else breaks and stops working, we're gonna try to post 3 videos a week. Definitely can get it done, just doing some quick editing over the weekends. These videos don't take long to edit, so hopefully 3 vids a week is the goal. But we're gonna start off the year talking about our 5 best lures of last year, which was 2021. So I'm gonna let Eric start.
All right, so there were just too many baits to choose from, so we each have an honorable mention, and all of my picks are going off of just purely number of bass caught. But my honorable mention is going to be a jerkbait. In terms of total bass, it wasn't one of my top 5, but this was far and away my #1 smallmouth bait this year. The jerkbaits I used for the most part were this is the Rapala Ripstop, and then this is the Shadow Wrap. So both of them put in work for me. Anytime we were going somewhere where we're targeting smallmouth, a jerkbait was always tied on, and there's actually one point where I caught a 23 to 24 inch rainbow trout on this exact jerkbait fishing for smallmouth. So jerkbait put in a lot of work for me this year, and I'm definitely going to fish it more in 2022.
Alright, so my honorable mention is similar to Eric's. I'm not basing this off numbers at all, but this just a little, it's a football jig, but I always trim them to look like a finesse jig. And this lure caught me a couple of big fish this year. I lost a couple of big ones this year. I caught my second biggest smallmouth of the year on one. And it was just something, it really helped me in the fall. I caught a ton of fish in the fall on just a little finesse football jig. It just seemed to work. So the honorable mention has to go to it. It just put in a lot of work for me this summer and fall.
All right, my number 5 bait of 2021 isn't necessarily a bait as much as it is a rig, and it's the good old Texas rig. For the most part, I'm fishing 4/0 EWG Gamakatsu hook, and I generally like to use a really lightweight. This is a 3/16 ounce tungsten, and I believe for probably 90% of my fish, I was fishing this unpegged. It just gives the bait a really good action, especially when you're fishing a tube, which is my favorite Texas rig bait, because when you're fishing this without a pegged weight, it really just allows that tube to glide and kind of dance in the water when you're fishing it. So it was really consistent all year, especially in the summer and fall. The Texas rig was a huge producer for me, and it's a great way to slow down and get more bites, but not necessarily sacrifice the size of fish that you're catching.
Alright, so my number 5 bait of 2021 is the drop shot. So I don't necessarily love fishing the drop shot. So yeah, when nothing else is working, you can always tie on a drop shot, catch a few more fish. It's not very fun to fish, in my opinion. In fact, it's pretty awful to try to fish. But if it's worth catching a few more, then I would always tie it on and give it a shot at the end of the day.
All right, moving on to my number 4 bait of 2021, and it was the chatterbait. Chatterbait is something I honestly didn't fish a whole lot before this year, but this year it really produced for me, especially in ponds or really anywhere where I was fishing around grass. I could just cast it out, and just once you feel it get in the grass, you can pop it out. Or if you're fishing really heavy grass, I'll put it on a rod with braid and seriously just rip it through the grass, and I caught some really good fish that way. The majority of my chatterbait fish came on this. This is a D&M Baits Piranha swim jig, which is a swim jig that comes without a lead guard. Then I attached a Queen Tackle switchblade, so it's pretty cheap. This in total costs, I think, like $8, and the trailer I'm using is usually the Big Bite Baits Kamikaze Swim On, and you can see I'm usually using it in that bluegill color, and it just makes a really nice panfish profile, and it was really good to me this year, and I'm definitely going to be fishing it a lot more in 2022.
Alright, so my number 4 bait of the year was another bait that's not very fun to fish. but it's the wacky rig. Sometimes when I fish the wacky rig, I do feel like an 8-year-old kid or a Walmart special. Nothing against them, but the wacky rig catches fish. There's something about it that just catches fish, and it does sometimes. I have caught bigger fish on it as well. So it's just another thing like the drop shot you can throw after after you beat down the bank with a moving bait or something. You can just tie on a wacky rig and go catch a few more fish. And to me, it's worth it even if it's not fun to fish, just to get a few more fish on the bank.
All right, speaking of rigs that aren't fun to fish, my number 3 bait of 2021 was the Ned rig. The Ned rig is one of those baits, like Andrew was saying, that you don't necessarily love to fish. I almost never show up to a body of water with a Ned rig tied on, but I found that more often than not, I leave with a Ned rig tied on, because after you've thrown baits like a chatterbait or a jerk bait, a lot of times there are a lot of fish that are still willing to eat, but they just need a little profile. So most of my Ned rig fish this year came on the Z-Man TRD ticklers. It's basically just your regular TRD, but it has some of these tube-like tails, and it just gives it a really nice subtle action. I believe all but one of my Ned rig fish this year came on an EWG Ned head, just fishing from the bank and up north around a lot of grass. Having that EWG gives you such a huge advantage. This is the Z-Man Ned Locks jig head, the EWG version, and 1/10 ounce is my go-to. I will say I didn't catch any big fish on the Ned rig, but I had some days where I caught a couple fish on a crankbait or a jig, then I tie on a Ned rig and I can catch 15 to 20 fish. So it's always a bait that I have in my box. I don't necessarily tie it on all the time, but when I do, it produces.
All right, so my number 3 bait has to be the swim jig. So this is, in my opinion, this is probably the most fun lure to fish and catch fish on out of any bait you can throw for bass. That's just my opinion, but sometimes throwing out a swim jig and just whacking them out of grass and out of wood is just so much fun. And this year, swim jig did pretty good work for me. I didn't fish it much in the summer. I mostly stuck to other baits, but in the fall, we started fishing a lot. Eric and I started fishing a couple of bodies of water with a lot of wood, and this thing just smacked them. I actually ended up catching my biggest fish of the year in mid-October on a swim jig. I caught a 6-pounder. I've just always found that swim jigs catch the biggest fish. My PB 6.4 is on a swim jig, and I caught that 6 this year on a swim jig. I just think that swim jigs are a big fish catcher, but they also can put up numbers on any day in the summer or fall. So yeah, there's my number 3 bait, good old swim jig.
So speaking of the swim jig was my number 2 bait of the year, and technically it did catch me the most fish out of any other bait, but you'll see my number 1, it just caught me a lot better size, which is surprising because the swim jig does tend to get pretty big bites. For the most part, I was fishing, by the way, I make my own skirts and put them on these Boss jig heads, so all these jigs you're seeing me hold up are custom colors, including that one that I made for Andrew. But this is kind of a custom, like, Be-Height Delight color. It's a popular color in the Z-Man Chatterbait line. And then also I did really well on like a green pumpkin shad or just a good old bluegill. And the one thing with a swim jig is that your trailer choice is really crucial. For the vast majority of my swim jig fishing, I go with the X-Zone Swammer. These both have the 3.5, and this swim jig has a 4-inch. It just depends on what profile I'm going for. But that swammer gives the swim jig so much body roll and so much secondary action that it is an absolute game changer, and it's really durable as well. But like Andrew was mentioning, anytime I was fishing around wood or a lot of like heavy cover and grass, any type of jig really produces, but the swim jig especially. It just seems to work everywhere I go, from early spring all the way to the last fish I caught this year, which was November 13th, November 11th, somewhere around there. But that fish was on a swim jig as well. Yep. So
So was mine. My last fish of the year was on a swim jig too.
So it produces all year round, and those last fish of the year we caught, that water was probably 45, 46.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cold water, and they were still munching a swim jig. So it's a great year-round bait.
All right, so bait number 2 for me was actually a full rig. This was the basic Texas rig. This summer it put in so much work. I probably caught double as many fish on this as any other bait in the summer. So basically, all I was rolling all summer was the Berkeley Power Bait, the Pit Boss. Mostly in the green pumpkin green color. I just stocked up on a bunch of packs of the same color because it's just super natural and it's a good color. We were using some 4/0 Gamakatsu hooks, which a little tip, if you go to Walmart, you can find these for $1 cheaper than anywhere else. So I just stock up on those at Walmart too. They're not the best hooks ever, but for $3 for a pack of 5, you can't beat it. Super sharp. And then just a 1/4 ounce tungsten weight. I don't necessarily love to throw around a lighter weight just because I like that casting distance, but I just found that a 1/4 ounce gets through cover pretty well, but it's also not too heavy. So that rig right there just put in so much work this year, and I will definitely be fishing it in 2022.
So now it's time for the grand reveal, my number 1 bait of 2021, and it's not even a competition if I'm going to be honest. The fluke was just, I mean, from probably June on, I don't think I ever took a fluke off of my rod. Like, it was always tied on, and because it produces everywhere. I fish that just like the Texas rig with a 4/0 EWG Gamakatsu hook, always fish it weightless. And my favorite fluke that I've found, I've tried a bunch of different brands. I've tried the Strike King Caffeine Shad, the 6th Sense one, but really none of them beat the original Zoom fluke. Just something about the way it glides and the action when you just twitch the rod is just second to none. Most of my fish were on the Houdini color, but I caught fish on the Smoking Shad, the Green Pumpkin Chartreuse. Really all of their colors are really, really good. But when you're fishing around here from the bank in the north, in the summer, we just have so much grass. There are a lot of bodies of water where the grass has grown up within, a foot of the surface. And while a swim jig is really weedless, it's just too heavy and it still gets down in that grass. But the fluke, you can always just fish it right over it. And you can almost fish it like a Senko. You can fish it slow and just pop it a couple times. You can fish it like a hard jerk bait. You can just give it like a twitch and then let it sink for a bit, twitch. You can fish it like a top water. You can work it really fast right beneath the surface. And there were a few times where I was getting blow-ups by fishing a fluke, and that's when you should probably be fishing it fast up on top of the water. But just in terms of versatility, I mean, you can ask Andrew. I fish these pretty much non-stop in the summer and fall because they simply produce. It's been my top bait since I started bass fishing a couple of years ago. It's always just been super consistent for me, and far and away number 1 bait of 2021.
So the thing about the fluke is I had some, but I never really fished them until this year because Eric was consistently outfishing me every time we fished a body of water with grass. I was trying to throw things like the chatterbait and the swim jig above that grass, not working, so I had to find other spots, and he was always just twitching the fluke above the grass, and he was out fishing me like every time we went out. So finally I started fishing the fluke, caught a few on it this summer. Definitely need to try it more in the June, July months. This year I didn't really start picking it up till August and September when the grass started going down and you could actually fish the swim jig again. So never really got a great experience with it, but Eric has kind of proven it to me that fluke might be one of the most productive lures in those June and July months where the grass is at the highest level it's going to be at all year.
Another thing I want to note about the fluke, I know I have a lot to say about the fluke, but it's because it's my favorite bait to throw. I believe 7 out of my 10 biggest fish this year were all on the fluke, which is kind of surprising because it's not a big bait. It's only 5 inches long. It's not a giant bait by any means, but just the situations where I can throw it, and I can throw this where I can't throw any other bait, which is a lot of the reason why, you know, you can catch big bass on this. My biggest bass of the year, aside from my PB, which was 4.5 pounds, that was on a crappie jig, because that just makes a ton of sense. But my second biggest fish was about 4 pounds on the fluke, just twitching it past some stumps over grass. And on that same day, that was my best fishing day of the year. That was my biggest 5-fish bag of the year. I believe I caught like 14 fish that day in just a couple hours. They were all really nice sized. So fluke, by far, number one.
Alright, so my number one bait of the year, not my favorite bait to fish. It's definitely a fun bait to fish, but there's others that I'd rather fish. But this is just the little chatterbait custom Tackle Warehouse special, I guess you could say. They're only sold at Tackle Warehouse. They're like $7. They come with a really sharp hook. You can get them in 3/0, 4/0, or 5/0, I believe. They have good colors, gold blade, which I like around here because most of the bait fish are, you know, golden shiners and bluegills. So yeah, gold blade definitely seems to work better around here. But overall, one thing I do like about these chatterbaits, now I have used other ones and they do work, but I like that the customs they have, they're a little bit smaller, which I like because I believe that you can catch more fish with a smaller bait and the big fish won't really care. Like if you swim one of these by a big fish and then maybe a bigger chatterbait like his by a bigger fish, I think they'll eat both chatterbaits, so I don't think it really matters that much. It's got good plastic keeper. It's got one wire plastic keeper. Just a nice chatterbait, and it definitely put in work for me this year. I think I ended up catching like around 120 bass on a chatterbait this year, so definitely my most productive lure. And it was basically all throughout the summer. I didn't really fish this in the fall. Once we got into the fall, I switched to a swim jig because I was fishing a lot of wood, and you know, these things don't do great in wood. But during the summer and spring, chatterbait caught me a ton. So yeah, looking forward to throwing that around next summer.
Alright you guys, that's going to do it. Those are each of our top 5 baits plus an honorable mention from 2021. And we want to hear what your guys' top 5 baits are. Make sure you guys drop a comment down below. Tell us what your favorite baits were of 2021. And if you like this style of video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. We're going to have lots of reviews and unboxings coming out in the near future, so stay tuned for that.
And we're only about, you know, a month and a half away from fishing season. Feels like it's never going to be here. I mean, we literally have like almost 2.5 feet of snow out there. It's ridiculous, but it'll eventually be here, and we can go out and smack some fish on some swim jigs and chatterbaits and whatever else we've talked about today. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel and go ahead and follow me on Instagram at rookie_angling.
In the description.
In the description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.